Okay. Welcome everybody to Hofstra University Museum of Art program on Romare Bearden, Overlapping Meanings. My name is Karen Albert. I'm the director of the museum. As always, I'd like you to leave your microphone on mute as we do the presentation. And you can now certainly ask questions in the chat, and at the end we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answers. Just wanted to remind everybody that the session is being recorded. And before we get started today, we'd like to ask everybody if they would mind answering us a quick question for us on this poll. We just kind of want to know where you heard about the program. We reached out in a number of different ways this time. We kind of want to see how people heard about us. So if you don't mind just answering a quick question before we get started, we'd appreciate that. We had just going to give it another minute here. All right, so thank you for bearing with us while we do the poll. We just wanted to get a little bit of feedback. Okay, so on to the main event. So this week, this is our second session in our 5-part series, Romare Bearden, Overlapping Meanings. So we're trying to, with the 5 sessions, really provide you a much more in-depth look at a particular artist. It's the same Zoom link for all 5 sessions, and each Friday I will resend the confirmation email so you have the link available to you. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about exploring influences, themes from the Harlem Renaissance to Homer's classical hero. So as we discussed last week, Romare Bearden was a visual artist, author, and songwriter who drew from his personal experience to illustrate the broader experience of Black Americans, telling stories that connected the past to the 20th century. Delving into his personal experiences for insight and drawing on his deep knowledge of history, literature, and music, Bearden merged his artistic expression with his cultural heritage to provide social commentary. So this session, we're going to talk specifically about the artwork that's in our collection. So Bearden's mature style developed over many years as he worked through modes of social realism, figuration, and abstraction. In the 1960s, he focused on his unique collage method, which combined historical and present-day imagery with a modernist concern for space and form. The collage technique that he developed allowed him to densely layer many references, creating overlapping meanings. So he mixed a lot of different media, paint, colored paper, fabric, pencil, and magazine photos. He often photocopied elements, such as faces and hands, and then manipulated and reassembled those images in the collage. So his subject matter typically merged references to the rural American South and his African ancestry, referencing textiles and masks, with the cosmopolitan urban North. So collage technique allowed him to assemble a lot of different images and juxtapose those images. So the museum collection contains 27 prints by Romare Bearden. So these include lithographs, screen prints, and engravings. And he manipulated these processes, often combining them to create new methods that he wanted to recreate the look of the collage in his prints. So I'm just going to give you a brief description of some printmaking terminology and some words so that you, as I go further, you'll understand what I'm referring to. So there are 4 major printmaking methods that have developed over time: relief, intaglio, and then 2 planographic techniques, lithography and screen printing. The printmaking technique is defined by what surface is printed. So in a relief print, it's the raised surface that is printed. And the most typical relief print is the woodcut or a woodblock print. Okay, so the top surface is what's inked and printed. When you're printing the surface that's below the plane of the plate or incised into the plate, that's an intaglio print. An intaglio print are done with there's a range of different techniques that include engraving and etching, dry point, aquatint, and mezzotint. These are just some of the words that you may hear to understand what they mean. Planographic methods means that the print is the same surface. It's not raised or lowered. So that's lithography and screen printing. So a print, when we're talking about a print, we're talking about, in the broadest definition, it's a work of art that's composed of ink on paper that's created through an indirect transfer process, and it exists in multiples. Okay. The artist or the publisher determine how many impressions to make, and that's called the edition. You'll often see a number on the bottom of a print. For example, 76/150, which is my example here. That means that there were 150 prints printed, and it said this is number 76. So it's a very much a mid to later 20th century convention that prints were numbered. So it's a way of keeping track of how many were in an edition. There's also other notations you'll see on a print. Sometimes you'll see AP, that's an artist's proof, or PP, a printer's proof. So the initials and the notations on the print gives you some additional information. The other thing to remember, especially when we're looking at some of Romare Bearden's work, is that prints that are made with multiple colors need multiple blocks or plates or stones for each color. It can get very complicated. So I just want you to keep that in mind when you see some of these prints that Romare did with 20 colors. That's 20 plates, just so you can understand a little bit about what that means. And when you're printing multiple colors, you have to line everything up very precisely so that as you put it through the printing press, it's what they called registers. Registration is true, which means everything is lined up, that the colors are filling in the right spots on the print. Next week, we're going to see from the Blackboard printmaking workshop a demonstration about some printmaking techniques. And I think that will clarify a lot of your questions about how prints are done. I think we're looking very much forward to sharing that with you, because I think it'll be really interesting to you. So in the late 1960s, Bearden began a collaboration with the Printmaking Workshop, which was a nonprofit studio run by his longtime friend, the artist and master printer, Robert Blackburn. So throughout his career, Bearden worked at the workshop and with other printmakers also to complete more than 100 prints using various techniques, often combining different printmaking methods and developing new processes to create the image that looks like his collage. He viewed printmaking as an outlet for experimentation and also as a way to reach a larger audience because they are produced in multiples. And that would allow many people to own the same image. With Bearden, and we'll see this as I go on, it's sometimes difficult determine the exact number of prints in an edition, because he often ran a print off and then would take it back to his studio and do additional work on it. So this print is called Homage to Mary Lou, or the Piano Lesson, and it's a lithograph that was done in 1984. As I had mentioned last week, the Bearden family home was a meeting place for many artists and writers of the Harlem Renaissance. Beginning in the 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance witnessed a resurgence of art, dance, literature, and music by Black Americans, including such notable figures as Aaron Douglas, Duke Ellington, Langston Hughes, Paul Robeson, Augusta Savage, and Charles White. This valuable foundation in art, literature, and music remained with Bearden throughout his lifetime. He was exposed to many of the jazz greats, and his method of working in collage has often been compared to jazz improvisation. Duke Ellington was one of his first patrons. At Bearden, he was also a songwriter, and he wrote songs for Billie Holiday and Dizzy Gillespie. And he later designed the record album cover from Wynton Marsalis. So a number of his images reflect elements of jazz and that kind of improvisation and kind of rhythm of jazz you can sometimes see in his work. He also on occasion created print editions to raise funds for his wife Nanette's dance company, the Nanette Bearden Contemporary Dance Theater. And this lithograph was done for that purpose. It was based on a collage by the same name, the Piano Lesson, that was completed in 1983. And it's one of many works he completed on the theme of memory and music. So Bearden translated the original collage into a 24-color lithograph, which really emphasizes bold use of color. And as I said, the lithography process is a process where the artist draws with a greasy crayon or paints with a liquid touche directly on a stone or plate, capturing the hand of the artist. This print was commissioned by the theater in honor of Mary Lou Williams, a jazz pianist and composer. In the image, you see the piano teacher hovers closely over the student, intimately involved with this lesson. You can see the relationship between the teacher and the student. Interestingly, this image, the collage, was also the inspiration for August Wilson's Pulitzer Prize-winning play, The Piano Lesson. So all these things start to connect. So as far as the printmaking goes, each color would be a different block and a different run through the press. So this is 24 different colors. So that means that same sheet of paper went through the press 24 times with a different color ink on it. So if you look at how complicated that would be to make sure that everything lines up just beautifully. And this is very much in keeping with, it does have the look of a collage, which was very important to Bearden, that his printmaking looked like his work, that we weren't seeing something different. This is another lithograph called Pilot. And Bearden also did, excuse me, I lost my place. Bearden's work captured many aspects of daily life, and references to the Bible and religious traditions in lithographs such as Pilot, and the next one I'm going to show you, The Three Women, Easter Sunday, emphasized the importance of spirituality in his community. In these prints and many others, the way the figures are portrayed and the inclusion of areas resembling African textiles and patterns are reminiscent of his collage works. So here, rather than in a collage, he would have probably cut out paper or actual fabric and pasted it on. Here, he's recreating it in the lithograph to give you that same sense of the patterning and the design of the fabrics and the clothing. Bearden also employed screen printing to create some of his prints. And screen printing is a process that uses a type of stencil and can produce large areas of saturated flat color. In this print, Mother and Child, he combined the printmaking methods to create the final image. The solid color rectangles of the background are screen printed, the green and the blue, and actually a little bit of the red there too. Well, the figures of the mother and child were created using a photolithographic technique. Okay. So again, this is a mother and child. It's very much the emphasis of the importance of the family unit. It also evokes the idea of the Madonna and child. It gives you that same feeling. I think that there's the Bearden often took elements of the figures and made some larger. Like for instance, her hands are quite large in proportion to the rest of her figure and her head, and she's cradling that baby right next to her. So that making the hands larger, it really emphasizes that connection between mother and child. And I think this close-up of her face shows you how this is a print, but how it really resembles a collage. You can see that there's different elements here from the lower half of her face, from her nose, and then her eyes and her forehead, and even her earring on the side. You can see that those are not, that they're made up of different pieces that are reassembled. And that was how he really wanted to evoke the image of a collage, even though this is a screen print and it's all ink on a flat piece of paper. Okay. This is also a screen print, and this is a poster that Bearden designed to commemorate the Montreal Olympics in 1976. And the graphics on this are really simplified, and they're highlighting the beauty and the grace of the human form. And they really allude to figures on traditional Greek vases. Also, there are other elements here referencing to the origin of the Olympics, with the Greek architecture of the columns and the torch that you can see here. And I wanted to, in case somebody's not familiar with what some of the Greek vases would look like, I found this is one at the Met, so it kind of really gives you that connection. You can see where he was drawing that imagery from. And Bearden was a very well-educated person. He certainly knew his art history. He was somebody who really knew the history of art. So definitely, let's go back so you can see the figures on the poster. And then this is a very traditional Greek amphora that would, you could see that connection that he's made to art history. Okay. So many of the prints in our collection really tell the story of the printmaking process. As I mentioned, an artist will oftentimes pull proofs at various stages of development in the production of a print to see how it's going and to see what it looks like and how it's developing. And this really provides us a glimpse into the artist's creative process and the evolution of the final image. So Bearden's working style was very improvisational and intuitive. After running a print through the press, he would often add collage elements, watercolors, and changes to the ink color, creating a unique image. So it's not part of the final edition. As I discussed last week, it is through the generosity of Carol and Alex Rosenberg, who was a publisher of many of Bearden's prints, that the Hofstra Museum is fortunate to have several prints at various stages in the process. And it really helps us provide insight into the artist's process. So this was from the exhibition a few years ago when we had them all in the gallery together, so you could see them. This is the final print that was editioned. Okay, so you can see that it's called The Family. Its preparations for the mealtime are getting underway. It's a very rural domestic setting. However, he moves the image from the typical to the mysterious by including some seemingly arbitrary changes in scale. If you look at the female figure on the right, her hand almost looks like a mitt. It's very large and not as defined. There's a disembodied eye in the tablecloth in the front center. I'm going to show you a detail in a second. And there's also one of the things that I find most interesting is on the left side, there is a partially obscured female fig nude on the side, separated from the family by a wall. So it adds a bit of surreal quality to this print about how he just chose these pieces, how he chose that composition. I mean, there's things that are very, I mean, obviously they have the table there, they're preparing food. You see the mop and the bucket on the left. There's lots of little details in here. So it's hard to, this is the close-up of where the figure is. And then this is in the, I'm going to go back just 1 second for you. In that front center of the fold in the tablecloth. This is the, to your right, this is the eye that's on the tablecloth. Not quite sure what all is up to interpretation about what some of those elements might mean. But this is a very complex print that was creating using multiple photographic transparencies to make the base printing plate. Some of the patterns and textures were produced using additional plates, including the use of aquatint, which is an etching technique that can result in a very kind of watercolor-like appearance of the ink. So these are some of them. I'm going to show you some variations that we have in our collection that they show how he was working. This is an earlier print that actually has some notations on it about what he was thinking. As you can see, the child's face, and this has not been added yet, it's not defined. And this print includes some handwritten notes. It's over on there's some over on the left, and there's some up in the middle, and on the table there. And the print, these are some of the details. So this is actually what's written on the print. On the left-hand side, you can see right above the bucket, it says gray upstairs, and there's some arrows pointing. And on this one here, right under on the white shirt, it says face okay here. So this is the print, and you can kind of see a little bit where the writing is, but it's kind of hard to see on that. So maybe just a couple little details. So this was, as he was working and he pulled this print, he was looking at it to see, what do I need to fix? What do I like? What do, what's not quite working? So this is also the same base print, also not completely finished because some of the elements are not visible. I think on this print, you can see the eye a little bit more clearly on the tablecloth than in the final version. But this one was printed in black ink, and it has hand coloring. The yellow kind of tones are all hand coloring, and there's some tints of green and blue up in the upper part. And there's also collage. There's a piece on the bottom left that's actually another piece of paper adhered to the print. Okay. So that gives you an idea of some of what he was doing so this is a unique print. There's not another one like this, just to be clear. And this is an additional, this is a one he called an artist proof, and he made 12 like this. So this is done in brown ink and also has some elements of hand coloring and collage in it. So you can see it kind of has, so this is I'm going to go now to give you the final version. So you can kind of see how he worked on it, how he developed it, what he liked, what he didn't, which is a unique aspect of some of the prints in our collection. Okay, I'm going to move on to, this is called The Train, which is a series that refers to everyday life and also the larger ideas of migration and segregation. Beginning in the early 20th century, there was a mass movement of Black Americans known as the Great Migration from the rural South to the industrialized cities of the Northeast and Midwest. Often traveling by train, they sought better jobs and living conditions. For Bearden, trains were an important presence in the rural South, as they connected families and transported them in many directions and back and forth. He had, even though as we discussed last week when we talked about his biography, although he was living and growing up mainly in New York, his family was still in the South, and he would go back and visit. So the train referenced in this title is in the upper left corner of you can see it better in another version of the print. in the upper left corner of the image. So this was also based on a collage he did in 1964. This print was done in 1974. And his prints to be seen like his collages. And this one, they had to use a number of photographs and mesh screens to make the photogravure plate, which they then manipulated, cut apart, and reassembled. It was a very complicated process, I'm sure. So this is a primary proof. So a primary proof would be, as you're starting to work on it, you think you're pretty much done, and you want to see how it's actually going to print. Because sometimes it's hard to tell when you have the plate and the ink, what it's actually going to look like on paper, okay? So this is another version of, he called this a working proof. And this one he printed on a larger sheet of paper, and then he took back and he did this hand coloring, which looks like watercolor washes across the front. So it's the same base image that we have before, but he's taking it and he's kind of saying, oh, maybe I could do something else with it. And that was very much how he worked with a lot of his prints. And this is a train, and I think this one you can see the train better in the upper left corner on this particular print that has the brown ink. And again, it has the hand coloring to give it the tonality, the different tones there. So, okay. So now we're going to go on to a series that a few years later, these are from the Odysseus Suite, and these are screen prints. So if you remember before, I spoke about screen printing giving you a larger area of kind of saturated deep color. So that's what these are. These are screen prints. So they look, I'm just going to go back one for you. This is an intaglio. So this is an aquatint and an etching and a photo engraving. So that's a different type of print, and it's going to give you a different look and a different line. Whereas a screen print, it's a little bit, it gives you a different look to the image. So drawing from classical literature, this series of prints, Bearden reinterpreted the ancient Greek poem of the Odyssey by Homer. The epic poem tells the story of the Greek warrior Odysseus and his long journey home after fighting in the Trojan War. He spent the next 10 years confronting violence and temptations before finding his way home to Ithaca and his wife Penelope. The hero, whether a Greek warrior or a Black man, faced many challenges and struggles during his travels and triumphed over them to discover his path home. So Bearden is making equations, equating the Black experience with this ancient tale, addressing the issues of a shared humanity that you're finding, you have to overcome lots of obstacles and temptations and what's in your way to find your way back home. So he's kind of trying to make it more of a universal story, excuse me. So again, you can see the influence of some of the elements of the Greek figure from the vase that I showed you earlier. In the figures here are very gracefully drawn Black calligraphic, very simple figures in most of these prints. And they also refer back to the Greek vase, and they also refer to the French artist Henri Matisse's paper cutout figures, which I'll show you in a few minutes. This Odysseus Suite was originally a series of collages in watercolors that were then translated into screen prints. So we have in the museum, this is a series of 20. We have 6 in our collection. So they illustrate the various events along the hero's journey back to Ithaca. Okay, so this first one is when he's leaving. So it's So he's leaving Ithaca to go off. So it basically shows the group of figures is mostly women who are sending him off to join the battle, right? So it's his leave taking. This next one is the fall of Troy, which depicts the aftermath of the battle. And you can see the sacked city is burning. There's the flames coming from the tops of the buildings. And off to our right stands the Trojan horse. I think everybody's familiar with that story of how they accessed Troy to gain, how they gained access to Troy. So this is again a print that looks a little bit like a collage. Like you could see that this could be cut out pieces of paper and things, and that's part of what he wanted to do, and that's part of what the screen print allowed him to be able to do. And this is as Odysseus continued his journey towards home, he encountered the goddess nymph Circe, who initially turns his crew into pigs. After Circe and Odysseus become lovers, she transforms the crew back into human form. They spent a year on her island, and when ready to leave, Circe advises Odysseus about the route to Ithaca and instructs him and his crew to plug their ears in order to sail safely past the Sirens, which is our next image. So this is the Siren Song. So the sirens are the sea nymphs, were creatures who lured sailors to their death with their enchanting song. So in this print, the crew lashes Odysseus to the ship mast so he can hear them while they have their ears plugged, because he wanted to hear the song. And I think in this particular print, around this, right before this time in the I think it was 73, he and his wife had built a house down in St. Martin in the Caribbean, and they were living both in New York and the Caribbean throughout the year. And I think in these prints, especially this one, you can see that influence of the Caribbean colors that he's using here. These beautiful blues and azures and purples, the greens, very much evoke kind of the colors of the Caribbean. At least for me, I see that as a real direct connection to the color palette that he's using here. I think is relating to his time that he's now spending so many months of the year down in the Caribbean. And this is, just to give you an idea, this is the Henry Matisse's jazz, and this is one of the figures where when I was mentioning Matisse's jazz, Matisse's cutout figures are very simplified forms, and they were made from cutout paper, so that they're very simple, they're very nice, elegant lines, lots of curves and flowing, and very much, Bearden obviously knew of Matisse's work. He studied in Paris for a number of years, so he was well aware of the connection that he was making here, and how he was doing these almost silhouetted forms, very reminiscent of Matisse. And this is called Cattle of the Sun God. So as Odysseus and his crew travels back, they stopped on the island of the sun. And while Odysseus lies in a spell-induced sleep, his crew yielded to hunger and feasted upon the cattle of the sun god. So in anger, the god Zeus killed the crew, and Odysseus ends up continuing on alone. And then this last one is he makes it home to Ithaca. All right, so you see Odysseus on the prow of the ship on the lower right, holding his spear and his shield, finally arriving home triumphant after the Trojan War, 10 years later. So I think that, these images all show what a prolific artist Romare Bearden was. And he experimented a lot with different mediums and different artistic approaches, but really came to, and then he came to the idea of collage became his really unique style. And partly because it allowed him to layer lots of different references on top of each other, and create a lot of these different meanings within the same work. His experiments in printmaking broke new ground, allowing him to create imagery in multiple, which made it available to a wider audience, which he was very interested in. And he created work that really related to his personal journey, and he tried to connect it to the larger humanity. And I thought this quote by him was just very apt about what his, he said, "My intention is to reveal through pictorial complexities the life I know." So he was really trying to show people, what life as a Black American was, and what was going on, and what are the things that were important, what he felt was important in his community. And those were the type of domestic scenes, references to the Bible, man's humanity. Those were the things that he thought were important, and those were the imagery. That's the imagery that he picked up. So I know that was a lot of visuals and a lot of information. If you have questions or comments, or want me to go back to one of the other images, let me know. You can put a little post in the chat, and Sasha will go through them for us.
So 2 came in that I'm going to go back to, and I see there is a new one. So let's start with the first 2, both from Ron Jansen.
Okay.
First, hold on, let me just add someone who just joined us, who I think fell out. Okay, so Ron's question: could you say something about why an artist would combine different printing methods, screen printing and lithograph, for example? What effects would the artist be striving for?
Okay. When an artist is choosing what type of print they're going to make, different prints will traditionally give you different types of lines. Okay, so a woodblock print tends to be a little bit rougher. Sometimes you can see the grain of the wood. The German expressionists particularly chose woodblock prints to use because it had that rough-hewn feeling, right? If you're doing a screen print, like the last series that I showed you from the Odysseus Suite, you're looking for really a nice, solid, saturated color. People are probably very familiar with Andy Warhol. Most of his works were screen prints. He was trying to get that same kind of look. So an artist is gonna choose what printmaking process he thinks that he wants his image to look like. I hope that's different. And the different etching, the different intaglio processes, whether it's an engraving or an etching or an aquatint or a mezzotint, those are very specific techniques. They all give you slightly different types of line and a different look to the work.
Okay, another question from Ron. I've seen videos of Richard Diebenkorn and John Cage making prints.
Mm-hmm.
It seems they did not do the actual printing themselves. How about Bearden? Did he do the actual printing or someone else?
Well, that's what he worked with Robert Blackburn, and Robert Blackburn was a master printer. There are some artists that are printmakers themselves and do their own printmaking. Oftentimes, printmaking is a collaborative process, and you will have people that will help you to create your plates or your stones or your screens, whatever your process you're using, and you will have a printer who will help you to help the artist create the vision that they want, the look that they want. It can get very complicated and it can get very technical, and there are some artists that are printmakers and do print their own work. I don't want to say that they aren't, but a lot of Bearden worked heavily with Robert Blackburn to produce his prints, to actually print the prints.
Okay. Question from Sharon. In the family print, mother and child, so I don't know if you want to go back to that one.
Okay.
What is the meaning of the larger hand of the mother?
Hold on, let me just flick back so we can look at the image while I talk. I think it's next. Okay. To me, the larger hand signifies the extent of her caring for her child, that she's really got him cradled right up against her, and those hands are keeping him safe. That's why I think that they're larger. I think he's made them larger to make them more important. that connection and that sense of tending to and caring for the child is what's emphasized.
And can I add something
Yep.
to that, Karen?
Yep.
There is also a tradition, like in Byzantine art and Romanesque art, the early images of mother and child, where the Virgin's hands are deliberately larger for just the reason that you're saying, to emphasize that she was like his seat of wisdom, she was his protector, and the hands were deliberately exaggerated. So I don't know if that's what Bearden was doing, but since he knew so much about art history,
it's very likely that he knew those references, I would think. I don't know I can't say emphatically yes, but it's very likely that he knew those references. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was a good question. And then another good question that just came in, did he do monoprints which would not have had multiple copies?
He did do some. I didn't talk about that. We don't have any of those in our collection, so I did not talk about monoprints. Monoprints is a way of transfer. It's still a print. It's transferring the image, from another surface onto paper, but you only do it one time. That hence mono. So they are unique individual. But we don't have. I was specifically talking about the works in our collection, so I didn't talk about monoprints at all.
And that's it for questions. Unless anyone else has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat.
Or you can raise your hand if you would like.
All right.
I'm just going to go back to my give you a little recap of what you looked at. But I think, to me, the most interesting thing is that we have all these versions of the same print. And we have them at different states and different techniques that he used. I find that really interesting. Because I don't think that you don't usually get to see that. You usually just see the final version of things. Anything else, Sasha?
Just Joyce says, nice presentations. That's
thank you. Appreciate that.
And that's it. No other questions.
Okay.
I would just comment that I imagine that's unusual to have that kind of sequence of the different stages of the print.
It is, because a lot of times, we have these because the print publisher gave them to the museum. And most of the time, an artist doesn't necessarily want you to see the process. I mean, they want you to see the final thing that they've done. But because we have all these different variations, and Bearden was somebody who often ran off an extra copy because he wanted to take it back to a studio and work on it and do something else to it. So that's why we kind of have it. Some artists don't work that way at all. So, it's kind of, it is, I think it's a unique aspect of our collection, definitely.
A question did just come in from Riyadh. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Are there any particular works of his, where the influences of the Harlem Renaissance can be seen the most?
Well, I think when I showed you the Homage to Mary Lou, the piano lesson, it's probably one of the ones that has the strongest relationship, because it's relationship to the Harlem Renaissance in the sense that he was brought up with all of these creative people coming in and out of his family home all the time. His father played the piano. He lived in Harlem. I think, Sasha, we said one of his studios was above the Apollo Theater for a number
years.
A number of years.
13 years or something.
Yeah. So he, that idea that part of his daily life was art and literature and music from the Black community was part of his daily life. And a number of his prints that we don't have, the ones that relate most directly is probably the Homage to Mary Lou piano lesson from our collection. But he also did a whole nother series. He's done other, this is not the limit of what he's done. He did a lot of other work where he did a whole series called Carolina Shout, which were all about jazz musicians and, their instruments and their playing. So it was something that I think was always part of his working. Yeah.
Yeah. Great question from Jane. Many thanks. Any influence from Cuban or African use of oversized hands or related non-European caring? That's a great question.
Well, That's a kind of a complicated question.
Yeah.
He did definitely look at African artifacts, textiles, and masks. He definitely used them in his collages. He would take, we had mentioned this last week, he did photostats and Xeroxes of the different masks, and he would then play with them. He would enlarge them or shrink them. You noticed in some of the prints, the scale on some of his figures, the heads could be larger or the hands were larger. They weren't necessarily exact to real life. Making the head larger is in some African traditions is very typical, because they felt the embodiment of who you were was in your head, right? Your spirit in your head. So a lot of times there'll be African figures that the head is in proportion much larger than some of their body. So I think that he definitely knew about this. He was not, as we've said, he was very much had studied art history. He definitely knew about things like this, and he did look at African masks a lot. And a lot of his patterning and designs on the clothing of the figures in his prints are based on African textiles. So I think he definitely did know about that. And I think his playing with the proportion of certain body parts is definitely intentional. It's not like that's because he would literally take a photostat and then he would make it larger or smaller, however he wanted to use it. So it was definitely an intentional decision on his part to emphasize whether it was heads or hands or whatever.
Right. And we can save this question too, Karen, for the last session, and we can kind of revisit this question. We have a little more time too.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? Please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat or raise your hand. Oh, here comes one from Amadi. Thank you. This was really informative. I actually own 3 prints by Bearden, including MLK Noah, Prevalence of Ritual series, and Homage to Ithaca from the Odysseus Suite.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice.
Nice.
Yeah, that's lucky. You're lucky. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Right. So we want to mention that next week the session's the same time, 3 o'clock on Friday, same Zoom link. And as I said, I'll resend the Zoom link again in the morning for you. But next week we're going to be joined by the Robert Blackbaum Studio in New York City, and they're going to give us a whole printmaking demonstration about lithographs. So you'll actually get to see how it's made. And I think some of the comments I made today might make a little bit more sense when you actually see how it's done. I mean, I can describe it and know how it's done, but to actually see the process and how complicated it is. And when Ron asked about, an artist doing the print himself, you'll see why you really need a printmaker to help you, because it can be very complicated. There's chemicals involved. There's all kinds of other, technical things that can happen that, I think that will really help everybody to understand the printmaking process is better. So I mean, also in the chat, Sasha had put in the, hold on one second. Sasha had put in the chat there was a book list that the Hempstead Public Library prepared for us that's in the chat.
Yes, it is.
And the not next week, but in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing an art project, and there's a flyer on there that has the list of type of collage things you might want to gather for that project. Okay, go ahead, Sasha. Sorry.
I'm sorry about that. So Sharon asks, what is the pathway for Bearden into the gallery world? She does say maybe this is a question for next week.
Yeah.
Or maybe we can save this one for that last session as well, because I'm kind of trying to keep track of some of these questions.
Yeah. So. I mean, we talked about it somewhat last week when we talked about his biography. He did have, in 1971, he had a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. He had a gallery that he had from the 1960s on. So he himself was pretty well, probably one of the more well-known, I think, Black artists of the time. we had questioned last week about Jacob Lawrence, which we think we're going to address that in our wrap-up session. We're keeping some of these questions to kind of go back to, because we need to make sure we have all the information for everybody. But he also was involved with opening his own, one of the founders of the Cinque Gallery, which was really meant to support younger artists. So he is somebody who has been in museum collections for, since the 70s. Definitely had had a gallery and a gallery representation. So he was also somebody who always tried to share that his good fortune, and reaching a hand back and lifting somebody else up. That was very much what he did. So anything else, Sasha? We good?
That seems to be it for now.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I thank everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it. Saw some familiar faces and names, which is always nice to see. And I hope you join us next week for the studio printmaking demonstration. I think it'll be really interesting. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, I hope you will too. And have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, I can.